The courtroom was heavy with tension, a silent storm pressing down on everyone seated inside. The buzz of murmured legal exchanges and clicking pens filled the stale air, while sunlight filtered faintly through high, narrow windows. It was a Tuesday morning, and the custody hearing of little Lila Dawson, just 3 years old, was well underway in a modest courthouse in Scranton, Pennsylvania. The case hadn't drawn any media attention, nor was it expected to. On paper, it seemed like a fairly routine, if emotionally loaded, battle between a separated couple fighting for custody of their child. Lila sat quietly beside her mother, Ashley Dawson, her small hands clutching a crumpled stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Her wide hazel eyes moved slowly, absorbing everything around her without speaking. She didn't cry. She didn't fidget. She simply watched. Most people assumed she didn't understand what was happening, or that she wasn't old enough to remember much. Judge Raymond Ellis, a composed man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness, presided over the case with his usual measured approach. Legal teams for both parents exchanged sharp statements. Lila's father, Eric Dawson, sat upright in his chair on the opposite side of the room, wearing a gray suit and a forced smile. He nodded along as his attorney painted him as a devoted father who had been unfairly cut out of his daughter's life. Ashley, in contrast, appeared worn and anxious. Her eyes never left Lila. While her lawyer argued that Ashley had done everything to protect her child, she knew it wasn't just about words or legal facts anymore. Something deeper haunted her, something she hoped wouldn't surface in this room, though part of her longed for the truth to finally come out. In the far corner of the room, near the main doors, stood a police K-9 named Thor, a massive German shepherd with a dark, alert gaze. He was there with his handler, Officer Daniel Martinez, as a routine part of courthouse security. Thor had been trained for detection, protection, and patrol duties. Though imposing in appearance, he stood still, alert but calm, his presence barely noticed until it it happened during a lull in the courtroom. One of the attorneys was fumbling with documents, and the judge took a sip from his water glass. That's when Lila shifted slightly in her seat. Her eyes, which had previously drifted between the people talking, locked onto Thor. She lifted one small arm and pointed directly at the dog. The gesture was subtle but deliberate. At first, no one noticed until Lila's voice rang out, soft but clear enough to cut through the silence. "That dog saved me from the bad man," she said. Every head turned. The courtroom froze. Judge Ellis lowered his glass mid-sip and stared at her. Garrett, her father, visibly stiffened. Ashley gasped and instinctively hugged her daughter closer, but Lila didn't flinch. She kept pointing. All eyes followed her finger until they landed on Thor, who remained motionless but alert, sensing the sudden shift in energy. Officer Martinez frowned in confusion and gently patted Thor's side. He whispered something only the dog could hear, but Thor didn't move. He kept his gaze forward. The judge cleared his throat and leaned slightly forward in his chair. "What did she just say?" he asked the court in a low voice. Ashley looked ready to speak, but the judge raised a hand. "I want to hear it again. Can you ask her, please?" Ashley turned to Lila, gently brushing a curl away from her daughter's cheek. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "what did you say about the dog?" Lila nodded and repeated, with the same steady voice, "That's the dog who saved me from the bad man. He barked really loud and made him stop." An audible murmur swept through the courtroom. Even the stenographer paused mid-keystroke. Garrett's lawyer stood up with an objection forming on his lips, but Judge Ellis raised his hand again. "Sit down," he said sternly. Then, looking directly at Officer Martinez, he asked, "Do you or your K-9 have any previous connection to this child?" Officer Martinez, still visibly puzzled, replied, "Your Honor, not that I know of. Thor's been part of standard courthouse rotation. We've been here several times over the past year, but I don't personally recall interacting." "With this little girl?" Judge Ellis nodded slowly. Then he looked to the court clerk. "Pull up any reports from the Scranton PD involving the Dawson residence, going back 12 months. Focus on any that involved domestic disturbance or required K-9 support." Everyone in the room felt the shift. What had started as a tense but ordinary custody battle now hovered on the edge of something far more serious, something buried in the past that a child had just brought to light with a few simple words. Thor stood firm. Layla stared back at him, her face calm but determined. Officer Martinez looked down at his partner, sensing that whatever was coming next wasn't just going to involve legal procedures. It might involve revelations that were never supposed to reach the courtroom. The judge adjusted his robe, sat back in his chair, and said gravely, "It seems this case just took a very unexpected turn." Officer Daniel Martinez sat upright in the witness chair, trying to maintain his usual composure. Thor sat obediently at his side, ears perked, eyes scanning the room calmly. In all his years as a K-9 handler, Martinez had seen his partner receive praise before, but never anything like this, never from a 3-year-old in the middle of a custody hearing. Lila's words echoed in his mind like a siren. "That dog saved me from the bad man." He kept asking himself, when? Where? He didn't recognize Lila, at least not at first glance. He had been on countless calls over the past year, some blended together. But the name, Dawson, stirred something faint. A night call? Something. About a disturbance? He couldn't be sure. Judge Ellis broke the silence that had hung in the courtroom like a storm cloud. "Officer Martinez, please state your full name and rank for the record." "Daniel Martinez, K-9 handler, Scranton Police Department, 12 years of service. Thank you." "I assume you've heard what the child just said. Have you or your dog, Thor, ever responded to an incident involving this child or her parents?" Martinez exhaled through his nose and shook his head gently. "Not that I can say with certainty, Your Honor, but I'd like to request access to past call logs. The name Dawson sounds vaguely familiar, but I can't recall the details." The judge nodded and motioned to the court clerk, who had already begun pulling up call records on a tablet. "Please continue reviewing police records for any incidents involving this family that required K-9 support," he said to the clerk. Meanwhile, Garrett Dawson sat frozen in his chair, one hand clenched tightly around the armrest. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something, but Garrett didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on Lila, who now sat quietly again on her mother's lap, gently stroking her stuffed rabbit. She seemed unfazed by the tension she had just caused. To her, she had simply told the truth, what she remembered. Ashley was less composed. Her eyes were rimmed with red, but her posture had straightened, and something about her gaze had changed. For the first time in months, she felt the truth might finally be heard, not twisted through legal arguments, but spoken plainly from the one person who had truly lived it, her daughter. Minutes later, the court clerk returned to the bench and handed Judge Ellis a report. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the document. "We have a match," he said aloud. "October 14th of last year. A 911 call from Ashley Dawson's residence. Dispatch recorded it as a domestic disturbance with a minor possibly present. K-9 unit was dispatched along with 2 officers. The report shows that Officer Martinez and Thor were first on the scene." Martinez's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Yes," he said, memory flooding back. "I remember that one now. It was late at night. We got a call from a neighbor reporting yelling and possible violence. Thor and I entered the residence while the backup unit secured the perimeter. We located a child hiding in a closet. The male Mr. Dawson claimed it was just a loud argument. There were no visible marks on the child or the mother, and they declined medical attention. Garrett's lawyer stood up suddenly. "Your Honor, I'd like to note that no charges were filed. That case was closed the same night." The judge stared at him coldly. "And yet the child is now identifying the K-9 as the one who protected her from a bad man. That's not something we can ignore." Ashley spoke up for the first time, voice trembling but strong. "I didn't speak out then because I was scared. Garrett told me he'd take her away if I ever told the police what really happened. That night, I lied to the officers. I thought staying silent was the only way to keep her safe." Gasps whispered through the courtroom like a wave. Even Garrett's lawyer didn't respond this time. Officer Martinez glanced down at Thor, then back at the judge. Thor picked up on something that night. He led me straight to that closet door, even though there were multiple rooms. He growled before I opened it. When I found the little girl, she was shaking and holding a blanket, but she didn't cry. She just looked at Thor and reached for him. Layla nodded, as if to confirm the officer's memory. "He found me," she said. The judge turned toward Garrett. "Mr. Dawson, is there anything you'd like to say?" Garrett shook his head, but his eyes darted nervously. For the first time since the hearing began, the confident father act was slipping. The judge sat back and pressed his fingers together. "I am placing a temporary hold on custody proceedings while we open a formal inquiry into the events of October 14th. Further investigation into potential child endangerment and domestic violence is warranted. Officer Martinez, I request that you and Thor remain available for additional questioning and evidence review." Martinez nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs. A simple custody hearing had unraveled into something deeper, a hidden truth brought to light by a toddler and a loyal K-9 who never forgot the night he found her. As the judge adjourned the session, Thor walked beside Martinez toward the exit, tail high, eyes scanning the crowd. Lila watched him leave and whispered again, just loud enough for those near her to hear, "He's my friend." And now, the court knew this case was far from ordinary. As Judge Ellis left the bench, the courtroom buzzed with quiet disbelief. Lawyers whispered, officers traded looks, and even the bailiff stood unusually still. The gallery, once disinterested and half-empty, was now alert. Every person present knew they had just witnessed the kind of moment that doesn't happen in courtrooms very often. Outside, a light drizzle darkened the courthouse windows. Inside, Officer Daniel Martinez leaned against a column in the hallway, gently rubbing Thor's ear. The German shepherd sat patiently, still alert despite the adrenaline from the courtroom. Martinez's thoughts spun. He kept playing back Lila's voice, the way she said, "That dog saved me from the bad man." "Thor," he said softly, "you knew, didn't you? That night. You always know." Back in the courthouse, Judge Ellis had quietly summoned the two lawyers and Ashley into his chambers. Lila was taken to a side room with a child psychologist who had been called in earlier, just in case. Garrett remained in the main courtroom with his lawyer, who was clearly struggling to hold together a crumbling defense. Meanwhile, the court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Harper Lane, knelt in front of Lila. She offered her a juice box and a small sketch pad. "Do you remember the big dog from today?" Dr. Lane asked gently. Lila smiled and nodded. "He's nice. He made the bad man stop yelling. Did the dog come to your house?" "Yes," Lila said. She picked up a green crayon and began drawing something. "The man was yelling at Mommy. Then the dog barked. He came in the closet and found me." Dr. Lane watched closely. The girl's tone was even and natural. No signs of prompting, no signs of confusion. It was rare for a child her age to describe events this clearly, but not impossible, especially when trauma made the memory stick. "Do you remember what the bad man looked like?" she asked carefully. Lila used the brown crayon next. "He has hair like this," she said, scribbling fast lines on a stick figure. "And he broke the bunny's ear." She pointed at her stuffed rabbit. Dr. Lane took notes quickly. This wasn't just emotional storytelling, this was testimony. From a child who had remembered exactly what mattered. Inside the judge's chambers, Ashley sat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "I should have told someone," she said. "I should have said something that night." Judge Ellis didn't look at her with judgment, only concern. "I understand why you didn't," he said. "But right now, I need to know everything." Ashley nodded slowly. That night, Garrett came home angry. He'd been drinking. I tried to keep Lila in her room, but she came out when she heard us shouting. He didn't hit her, but he hit the wall. The belt was in his hand. I told him I'd call the police, and he dared. Me too. I panicked. I told the operator it was just a noise complaint, because I didn't want Lila taken away. When the officers came, I smiled and said we were just arguing. "Why didn't you say anything when Thor found Lila hiding?" the judge asked. I said she was playing. I was terrified. Garrett told me if I made him look like a monster, he'd make sure I lost custody. Judge Ellis nodded. He glanced at her lawyer, then looked back at Ashley. That lie almost kept. The truth buried. But now your daughter may have saved herself in you. Back in the courtroom, Garrett was unraveling. He fidgeted in his seat, muttering under his breath. "She's 3. She doesn't even know what she's saying." His lawyer whispered, "Stop talking. They're reviewing records, and the psychologist is evaluating her. Don't make this worse." Garrett slammed the hand down on the table. "This is a setup. She coached the kid. There's no way she remembers anything from last year." The court officer gave him a warning glance. Minutes later, Dr. Lane returned to the courtroom. She approached the judge's clerk and handed over her notes. Lila's statements had been recorded, along with her drawings. Judge Ellis called everyone back in. "All parties present?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge's face was unreadable, but his tone was serious. "I've reviewed the psychologist's report, and I have no reason to believe the child was coached. Her recollection is consistent with the incident report from last October. She remembers the events clearly and independently." He paused, then looked directly at Garrett. "Mr. Dawson, I am ordering an emergency evaluation of your parental fitness. Until further notice, all custody proceedings are suspended. You will not have contact with the child pending a criminal investigation." Garrett's mouth opened, but his lawyer pulled his sleeve. "Say nothing." Judge Ellis turned to the bailiff. "Escort Mr. Dawson outside and make sure he is not near the mother or the child. Officer Martinez, I'd like you and Thor to stay for the recording of the full report." As Garrett was escorted out of the courtroom, Lila peeked from behind the side room door. She saw Thor again, this time from a distance. She smiled. "Bye, Thor," she whispered. Thor gave a single tail wag, just enough to show he heard her. In that courtroom, the night that had once gone unnoticed was being seen clearly for the first time. What a police report had buried in technical language, verbal dispute, no charges filed, was now opening like a wound that refused to stay closed. The case was no longer just about custody. It was about protection, truth, and the unexpected bond between a little girl and a K-9 who refused to forget the night he found her hidden in the dark. The courthouse was no longer a quiet stage for legal technicalities. It had become a place where hidden truths were finally surfacing. And at the center of it all was a little girl with a stuffed rabbit and a memory sharper than anyone had expected. Back in the small room where the psychologist had been interviewing her, Lila was finishing her juice box and coloring peacefully. Her mother, Ashley, sat beside her now, tears in her eyes, not from fear this time, but from relief. The lie that had suffocated her for so long was unraveling, and it wasn't because of an attorney or a courtroom argument. It was because her daughter had finally spoken the words Ashley hadn't dared to. Across the hall, Officer Martinez stood beside Thor while investigators reviewed the video footage from that night. October 14th. The body cam had captured more than just a routine wellness check. It had shown hesitation, tension, and fear. Martinez had reviewed it once before, but now he was seeing it through new eyes, through Lila's eyes. In the footage, Thor barked just before Martinez approached the closed closet door. The dog didn't bark at random. He barked at danger, at distress, at human fear. Martinez remembered the moment clearly now. The child was curled into the corner, clutching a blanket. She hadn't made a sound. Most children screamed or cried. Lila hadn't. She had looked straight at Thor and reached out her small hand. Now, months later, she still remembered that moment and more. Judge Ellis called for a full review of the full call logs, dispatch audio, and even photos from the scene that night. What he found disturbed him. The initial police report had been too brief, too neat. No visible injuries. Subject calm. Child appeared unharmed. But now, Lila's words painted a different picture, one of silent trauma. Of fear that didn't leave bruises, but stayed buried in memory. Ashley had told the court earlier that she hadn't spoken up that night out of fear of losing Lila. Now it was clear that she had almost lost her daughter in a more devastating way by letting her stay in the presence of someone who terrified her. In a private interview room, Dr. Lane, the child psychologist, met with the judge and the lead investigator. She isn't making it up, Dr. Lane said firmly. Her story was consistent even through open-ended questions. There was no leading, no coaching. She remembers the dog barking, the closet door opening, and the fear. And when I asked her about her father, she drew him with a black scribble over the mouth and said, "He told me not to talk." That's not imagination. That's trauma. The judge exhaled, leaning back in his chair. So we move forward. Yes, and you may want to consider bringing in Child Protective Services, Dr. Lane added. This wasn't a one-time incident. She's been carrying it for a year. Meanwhile, Garrett Dawson sat in a courthouse holding room, pacing like a man on a sinking ship. His lawyer was trying desperately to keep him from speaking to anyone. Garrett was angrier than he'd ever been. In his eyes, this wasn't about justice, it was betrayal. Betrayal by Ashley, by the system, even by his own daughter. He still refused to believe the situation had changed. She's a kid, he kept saying. Kids say crazy things. But Garrett had underestimated one thing: Thor hadn't just been a dog that night. He had been a witness. A trained, professional animal who responded to distress signals, pinned, danger. And now, he was at the heart of a case that was no longer just about custody. It was a criminal investigation. The next morning, the hearing resumed. Judge Ellis addressed the courtroom with gravity. Based on yesterday's testimony, the psychologist's findings, and the evidence reviewed, I am ordering a full investigation into possible child endangerment and domestic violence. Effective immediately, Mr. Dawson's visitation rights are suspended. A protective order is being filed for both Ashley and Lila Dawson. Gasps rose in the room. Garrett's lawyer stood, but was quickly silenced by the judge's firm tone. This court has been given reason to believe that a crime may have occurred and that the child in question was subjected to an unsafe environment. Until the investigation concludes, Mr. Dawson will not have contact with the child. Garrett exploded. This is insane. She's 3. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She knew enough to remember who protected her, the judge replied coolly. That speaks volumes. Thor, seated beside Officer Martinez, didn't move. But his presence remained powerful, an unspoken reminder that truth sometimes comes from unexpected sources. Outside the courthouse, word had started to spread. Local reporters gathered by the steps, whispering about the child witness and the shield hero dog, but none of them knew the full story yet. That would come later. For now, Ashley held her daughter close as they walked to the parking lot, surrounded by officers. Lila looked up and spotted Thor standing by a patrol vehicle. She waved, and Thor perked up, wagging his tail gently. Bye again, Thor, she said. Ashley turned to Officer Martinez. I don't know how to thank you. You and your partner. You saved her life twice. Martinez gave a humble nod. He just followed his instincts. She's the one who had the courage to speak. That night, Ashley tucked Lila into bed at her sister's house, their temporary safe haven. As she turned off the light, Lila said softly, Mommy? Yes, baby? Thor's not just a dog. He's a good soldier. Ashley smiled through tears. Yes, sweetie. He really is. And somewhere across town, Thor lay curled in his kennel, his tail twitching as if still dreaming of the girl he'd once found in the dark. A girl who had found her voice, and in doing so, had set the truth free. The courthouse looked different the next morning, not because the walls or halls had changed, but because everyone inside now knew this wasn't just a custody case anymore. What had begun as a seemingly ordinary legal dispute had revealed layers of hidden pain, silent trauma, and a child's chilling memory that had rocked everyone to their core. Garrett Dawson was back in court, but not by choice. After the judge suspended his visitation rights and launched a formal child protection investigation, he had spent the night under supervision in a courthouse holding room. He hadn't slept. His eyes were sunken, his jaw clenched, and the charming, calm image he had worked so hard to present was cracking. His lawyer had warned him again and again, stay calm, say nothing, let the process unfold. But Garrett didn't want to wait. He had spent years controlling the narrative in his home, shaping perception. And now, a toddler and a dog had shattered that control in a single-sentence dot in the courtroom. Officer Martinez sat beside Thor once. Again, the German shepherd rested calmly at his feet, appearing relaxed, but those closest to him knew Thor was always alert. His instincts never fully turned off, especially in places where tension lingered in the air, like fog. Judge Ellis entered the room, his expression unreadable. But the fatigue behind his eyes gave away the weight of what this case had become. He sat, adjusted his notes, and then addressed the court. We are resuming this session to assess the credibility of prior claims, behavioral patterns of both parties, and the forensic analysis from last year's domestic incident. At that, a plainclothes investigator stepped forward with a small folder. Inside were enhanced stills from the officer's body cam footage taken on October 14th, the night Lila had been found hiding in the closet. Your Honor, the investigator began, we've reanalyzed the footage and audio from that night. While the father appeared calm during the officer's presence, prior unrecorded minutes suggest signs of recent aggression: upturned furniture, a broken lamp, and notably, a child's toy with what appears to be a belt imprint. He paused and held up a photograph. The judge leaned forward. And this was not included in the original report. No, sir. The responding officer noted the disarray, but didn't document specific item damage, likely assumed to be accidental. But given the child's testimony, we gave those items a second look. Ashley's lawyer stood. Your Honor, I'd also like to introduce a sworn affidavit from a neighbor who made the original 911 call that night. She reports hearing screams from the child, not just yelling between adults. Judge Ellis reviewed the papers handed to him. The mood in the room shifted again. Garrett remained still, but was visibly shaking now. His fingers tapped erratically on the wooden defense table. The judge turned to Garrett. "Mr. Dawson, would you like to respond?" Garrett's lawyer shook his head subtly, but Garrett ignored him. He stood, voice trembling but laced with anger. "They're lying. This is all a setup. Ashley coached her. The kid's 3 years old. You're going to ruin my life over something a toddler said because she saw a dog she liked?" The courtroom stayed silent. Garrett's face reddened. "She's just a kid. She doesn't know what happened. You think she remembers a dog barking and suddenly you're going to paint me as a monster?" Before the judge could respond, Thor let out a low growl. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a blade. Officer Martinez instinctively put a hand on Thor's harness and gave him a quiet command, but the damage was already done. Everyone in the courtroom turned their heads. Lila was entering with a Child Protective Services officer. She paused. When she heard the sound, her small frame framed by the open door. She looked directly at her father, then turned her eyes to Thor. Calmly, she smiled at the dog and walked toward her mother. Ashley scooped her up without a word. She held her tight, like she had done so many times since the case began. But now, there was no more hiding. Everything was being laid bare, one layer at a time. Judge Ellis cleared his throat. "Mr. Dawson, I advise you not to speak further without your attorney's approval. The court will not tolerate emotional outbursts, especially when in the presence of a child." Garrett slowly sat, but the confidence had drained from his body. The judge looked down at his notes. "In light of the updated analysis, witness affidavit, and the psychologist's report, I find reasonable cause to believe that the child was exposed to an unsafe environment. As such, I am referring this case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges, and I am officially granting Ashley Dawson full temporary custody until further notice." Ashley gasped softly, her arms tightening around Lila. Garrett's lawyer finally stood. "Your Honor, I request time to respond to these new accusations in writing." "You will have that," the judge replied. "But as of this moment, Mr. Dawson is to remain at least 200 feet away from both Ashley and the child. Violating this order will result in immediate arrest." Outside the courtroom, media vans began to arrive. Rumors were spreading about the Courtroom K-9 case. Headlines were already being drafted. "Toddler's words ignite investigation," one reporter typed quickly on her laptop. Another whispered, "This one's going national." But inside the courthouse, none of that mattered. What mattered was that a child had remembered the bark of a dog, the fear in her bones, and the moment she had been found in the dark. And now, the man who had once stood above everyone, confident, untouchable, was unraveling, one thread at a time. The courtroom had gone silent again. But it wasn't the silence of order. It was the heavy, charged stillness of people racing for a truth they could no longer ignore. Garrett Dawson had returned to his seat, red-faced and trembling, no longer the image of a polished father, but a man cornered by reality. The walls he had built around his image were crumbling. The truth had been clawing its way out, and now it was about to be shown on screen. Judge Ellis nodded toward the clerk. "Please, prepare the body cam footage from the October 14th call. All parties will remain seated while we view the complete segment. Officer Martinez, please remain present with your K-9. The lights dimmed slightly as the court's central monitor flickered to life. On screen appeared Officer Martinez's point of view captured from the camera mounted on his vest. The footage began with the faint crackle of radio chatter and the grainy image of a front yard at night. Ashley reached for Lila's hand and held it tightly. Lila looked at the screen, her face suddenly quiet and alert. The footage showed Martinez approaching the front door. It opened after a moment. Garrett Dawson stood in the doorway, dressed in a white t-shirt, his voice calm. Too calm. "Sorry, officer," he said on camera. "Just a little shouting match, nothing serious." Martinez responded politely, but with firm authority. "We've received a noise complaint. We need to make sure everyone's okay." On screen, Martinez entered the house. It was dimly lit, the furniture slightly askew. A lamp was on the floor, a chair pushed sideways. A belt lay coiled at the edge of the hallway. Ashley's voice was heard off camera. "It's all right. I told him to keep it down." We were arguing. Then Thor came into frame, moving with steady purpose, sniffing the floor, the walls. He stopped at a closed closet door and barked once loud, sharp, and deliberate. The bark echoed through the real-life courtroom. Layla flinched slightly, but her hand stayed in her mother's dot in the footage. Martinez reached for the door handle. "Is someone in there?" he asked. "No," Garrett's voice said quickly from off-screen. But Martinez ignored him and opened the door. There, in the corner of the closet, sat a small child, eyes wide, wrapped in a blanket. No screams, no tears. Just quiet, unblinking fear. Martinez's voice softened. "Hey there, sweetheart. You okay?" The child looked up, then toward Thor. She reached out a hand and whispered something inaudible. Thor took one step forward and lowered his head. The footage paused. The judge looked around the courtroom. This child, Lila Dawson, was found in the closet during a domestic disturbance. Mr. Dawson denied her presence there. The mother appeared fearful, but stated the child was playing. That explanation no longer holds up based on what we now know. The footage resumed. Martinez stood and guided the child gently from the closet. The footage showed her looking over her shoulder repeatedly toward the hallway. Then the audio picked up Garrett again. She wasn't hiding. She just gets scared easy. Another officer entered frame. "We found broken glass in the kitchen. It looks like something was thrown." "Just a plate," Garrett answered quickly. "We had an argument." The child looked toward Thor again and spoke a word the microphone caught this time. "Scary." The footage ended. Judge Ellis let the silence settle. "This video contradicts Mr. Dawson's previous statements," he said. "It suggests fear, concealment, and a high-stress situation involving a minor. This court has now seen clear visual evidence of a child hiding during an incident described as nothing serious." Garrett's lawyer stood, trying to salvage what was left. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not," Judge Ellis interrupted. "This court has heard enough. For today." He turned to the clerk. "File the footage as Exhibit A in the case for the district attorney's office." Ashley held Lila close, tears spilling down her cheeks silently. Lila, sensing something big had just happened, looked up at her mother with wide eyes. "Mommy." "I was right," she whispered. Ashley smiled through the tears. "Yes, baby, you were very brave." Across the room, Officer Martinez patted Thor's side. The dog sat, still alert, tail resting gently on the floor. He had done what he was trained to do: detect fear, respond to danger, find the vulnerable. But this time, it wasn't just protocol. It had become personal. As the courtroom was dismissed, reporters swarmed outside. Headlines began spreading across news tickers. 3-year-old's testimony and police dog footage expose hidden abuse. Hero K-9 breaks custody case wide open. Public interest surged overnight. Inside, Judge Ellis met briefly with Martinez. "You and your partner may have changed the course of this child's life," he said quietly. "Sometimes justice wears a badge, and sometimes it wears a vest and walks on 4 legs." Martinez nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor. He just did what he's trained to do." Ellis smiled faintly. Perhaps. But it takes more than training. To protect a child from something the adults around her ignored. As Martinez and Thor walked out of the courtroom, they passed Lila one last time. She stepped out from behind her mother and gave the dog a small wave. "Thank you, Thor," she said. Thor looked at her, tilted his head, and gave the faintest whine, almost as if he understood every word. The truth had been silent for too long. But with one bark and a child's voice, it had finally been heard. By the next morning, the story had become national news. Headlines splashed across morning television and internet feeds. 3-year-old's words trigger domestic violence probe. Police dog uncovers hidden trauma in custody hearing. Toddler points at K-9, what she says rocks the legal system. Outside the courthouse in Scranton, news vans lined the block. Reporters stood with microphones, recounting the chain of events as new angles surfaced. The overlooked police report, the body cam footage, and the bravery of a child who had once been too small to protect herself until now. Ashley kept her phone on silent. She didn't need headlines to validate what she already knew in her heart. Her daughter had been in danger, and the system had almost missed it. Almost the night after the hearing, Ashley sat in her sister's living room holding Lila on her lap. She gently brushed her daughter's hair as the little girl colored pictures of dogs and hearts. Every so often, she glanced toward the front door. "Mommy," she said, "do you think Thor remembers me?" Ashley smiled. "Of course he does, honey. He'll always remember you." At the precinct, Officer Daniel Martinez leaned down to brush Thor's coat, speaking softly. "You know they're calling you a hero, right?" he said. "You didn't just find her, you gave her a voice." Thor rested his chin on Martinez's boot, tail thumping once on the floor. The news coverage, though supportive, brought a wave of scrutiny to the Scranton Police Department. Internal Affairs reopened a review of how the October 14th incident had been handled. Why hadn't there been a follow-up? Why were Ashley's injuries and Lila's silence dismissed so easily? One of the senior officers defended the decision in a press briefing. When no one talks, and there's no visible injury, sometimes you move on. We never expected a child to remember a dog months later and turn a custody case into a criminal one. But that explanation didn't sit well with the public. Not anymore. The district attorney's office wasted no time. Within 48 hours of the hearing, they officially opened an investigation into Garrett Dawson. Witnesses were contacted, including the neighbor who originally called 911. She was an older woman named Mrs. Langston, who had lived next door to the Dawsons for 10 years. When officers visited her, she opened the door with a shaky hand but a firm voice. "I should have said something back then," she admitted, "but he was always so calm in public, like nothing was ever wrong. That night, though, I heard that little girl scream, and not just once. It stuck with me." Her testimony, combined with Lila's, the psychologist's report, and the now viral body cam footage, created an undeniable narrative. Garrett Dawson had used fear, control, and manipulation to protect his image while creating an environment of silence and fear in his own home. When news broke that criminal charges were pending, Garrett's lawyer immediately filed a motion to withdraw from the case. Judge Ellis reviewed it, signed it, and issued a statement. No child should have to rely on a memory of fear to be heard. But when they do, it is our duty not to ignore them. Public sentiment exploded in support of Lila. Social media campaigns sprang up. Hashtag Speak Like Lila, hashtag Thank You Thor, hashtag Justice for Lila. A local artist even painted a mural downtown of a little girl with a stuffed bunny and a German shepherd by her side. For Ashley, all the attention was overwhelming. She wasn't trying to be famous. She was just trying to be free from the fear, the lies, the constant pretending. But through it all, she stood tall, knowing that her daughter's strength had opened the door for truth to walk in. Meanwhile, Garrett was served a formal notice. Pending charges of child endangerment, obstruction, and providing false statements during a police investigation. If convicted, he faced possible jail time, loss of parental rights, and a permanent mark on his record. His downfall wasn't dramatic. There was no big televised arrest. It came quietly, as all his lies unraveled in the face of undeniable facts. The man who once controlled every room he entered was now being escorted into one. He couldn't leave without permission. Back at the precinct, Officer Martinez reviewed a request from the DA's office. They want Thor and me to attend the final day of testimony, he told his captain. You going? The captain asked. Martinez looked down at Thor. We started it. We'll finish it. When the day came, the courtroom was packed. Journalists were told to stay behind a barrier. Police officers stood watch at every entrance. At the center of it all, Lila sat once more with her mother, holding her bunny. She didn't look scared anymore. She looked ready. Thor entered the courtroom to light applause, not loud, but sincere. People stood quietly, acknowledging that the dog had done more than just bark. He had listened. And then, without knowing it, he had sparked a truth that couldn't be silenced. Judge Ellis opened the session with calm authority. Today, we close the final hearing on this case. Based on every testimony, every shred of evidence, and the courage of one small child, we are not only protecting a family, but reminding this court of its duty to listen to even the quietest voices. He turned to Ashley. You have full and permanent custody of your daughter, Lila. Ashley wept openly, holding her daughter close. Judge Ellis turned to Officer Martinez and Thor. And to you both, I owe a personal thank you. Sometimes justice wears a uniform, and sometimes it wears a fur coat and a badge. The courtroom stood as the gavel fell, and through the noise, Lila stood up on her chair and whispered toward Thor. You can go save someone else now. Thor looked back at her. Just one blink, but in that blink, the bond between them was sealed forever. The courthouse emptied slowly, but the impact of what had happened within its walls would echo for years to come. The case that began as a simple custody hearing had become something much bigger, a story about courage, about silence finally being broken, and about the unexpected loyalty of a K-9 officer who had done what no one else could. As reporters packed up their equipment and murmured their last headlines into cameras, Officer Daniel Martinez walked Thor down the courthouse steps. The German shepherd didn't seem fazed by the cameras or the crowd. He walked calmly, professionally, his vest proudly in place. A few people clapped softly as they passed. Martinez gave a quiet nod, but didn't stop. He knew that this wasn't the time for glory. It never was with Thor. His partner wasn't in it for applause. He was trained to protect, to find, to listen to things others ignored. And he had done that perfectly. Ashley and Lila were just a few steps behind them. Lila's hand was wrapped tightly around her mother's, and she clutched her worn stuffed bunny under her other arm. As they reached the sidewalk, Lila paused. Can I say goodbye again? She asked. Ashley nodded, holding back tears. Of course, sweetheart. Lila stepped forward and crouched down in front of Thor. The dog stopped and tilted his head gently, ears forward, eyes fixed on hers. I won't forget you, she whispered. You found me when I was scared. You told me it was okay, even when I didn't say anything. Thor stared at her, then lowered his head just enough to press his snout softly against her knee. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a trick. It was a goodbye. Martinez smiled softly. He never forgets the ones who need him most. As they walked away, Ashley lifted Lila into her arms. She had waited so long for this moment, free from fear, free from doubt, free to just be her daughters. mother without someone looming over her with threats and control. And now she had it. All of it. A few weeks later, the courtroom was quiet again. No media vans, no flashbulbs, but the changes remained. Scranton's child protection system underwent a full audit. The police department instituted mandatory follow-up checks for any call involving a minor. And the footage from Officer Martinez's body cam was used in new training programs, proof that what doesn't leave a bruise can still leave a scar. Ashley began working part-time at a community shelter for women and children. She told her story, not for sympathy, but to remind others that speaking out doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. As for Lila, she went back to being a normal little girl, or at least as normal as a child can be after the world learns her name. But kids are resilient. She laughed, she ran, she played. And every once in a while, when she saw a dog on the street, she'd point and ask, "Do you think that one's like Thor?" Ashley would smile and say, "No one's exactly like Thor." And she was right. One brisk autumn afternoon, Martinez stood with Thor outside a local school. They'd been invited for a K-9 safety demo, but everyone knew the real reason. People wanted to meet the dog who had saved a child without ever saying a word. Inside the gym, children sat cross-legged on the floor, watching in awe as Thor showed his obedience, sniffed out hidden objects, and responded to voice commands. But when Martinez told the story not in legal terms, but in human words about how Thor had found a little girl who didn't cry or scream, but just hid in silence, the gym went still. He didn't need her to talk, Martinez said. He knew something was wrong, and that was enough. The applause was loud, and a few parents wiped their eyes. After the demo, a little girl stepped forward shyly and said, "Is he a hero?" Martinez looked at Thor, who stood tall and still. "He doesn't know what that word means," he said. "But yeah, he is." That night, as they returned to the station, Martinez reached into his locker and pulled out something new, an engraved tag, just for Thor. He clipped it to his collar quietly. It read, "Thor he listened when nitrogen monoxide one else did." At home, Ashley tucked Lila into bed as a soft breeze blew through the open window. The world felt different, now not perfect, but safe. As she brushed Lila's hair back from her forehead, her daughter blinked sleepily. "Mommy? Yes, baby? If I get scared again, will Thor come back?" Ashley swallowed gently and kissed her forehead. "He doesn't need to, sweetheart, because now everyone listens." Lila nodded and rolled over with her bunny, drifting into sleep. And somewhere across town, Thor lay curled in his station kennel, dreaming of halls and closets and the little girl he once found in the dark. He had done his job. He had been her voice. And now her voice would carry farther than anyone ever expected.